It's wonderful to be here with you today, Tiffani. I've been really, really looking forward to this conversation. Of course, you're incredibly well known. Your reputation precedes you for all things customers, experience, innovation, growth. And of course, we are going to be talking about the experience mindset, blending, conjoining, complementing customer experience and employee experience. And that's, of course, the name of your book, which many, many congratulations. Yes, you have it right there. You beat me to it. I love the book. It's very practical. It's very real. Lots of substantive research, great case studies, and of course, some creative illustrations and very personal to you too. So congratulations and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's just frame it before we dig into some of the detail of both the concepts, the idea, and the research. Let's just start with perhaps framing the conversation about when you think about fantastic customer experience and employee experience, just paint that picture and then we'll drill down.
Well, focusing on customer experience has been quite a long journey for me. It was all the way back in 2008, actually. I was a research fellow at a company called Gartner, which is the world's largest sort of consulting and analyst firm in tech. And I was part of the team that made the prediction that we believed chief marketing officers were going to spend more on technology than chief information officers. Again, 2008. Everyone thought we were crazy.
Yeah, I bet
but it wasn't, right? But it wasn't about the technology. We weren't saying it for technology, for the sake of just technology. And we also weren't talking about like online advertising or search engine optimization. We were literally talking about tech stacks. They were buying servers and storage. They were hiring UI designers and coders and software developers and design sort of user interface people and then change management. I mean, it was really the whole stack. Yeah. And we were doing it and saying it because we believed that customer experience was going to be the next layer of the competitive advantage brands were going to use. As things commoditized, as the internet changed competition and democratized access to technology and all the buzzwords and terms we've all heard, we believed that that experience was going to be that next battleground. And we were in many ways right. We weren't alone in saying it, but in many ways we were right. Billions of dollars have now been spent on doing sort of two things. One, reducing the effort of a customer.
Yes.
When they engage with you as a company in order to increase a positive customer experience. And that experience can be analog or digital, online, offline, human, a bot. I mean, it's very comprehensive, right? It's the combination of every touch point a company has with a customer.
Yes.
But unfortunately, the unintended consequence of that was the effort for employees actually went up. And the experience they were having was going down, meaning things like work satisfaction, the tools and systems they were using, the processes they were forced to go through. In full transparency, since we're at the beginning of this conversation, I am not a people expert, culture expert. HR is not my lane. My lane is really sales, marketing, customer service, customer success, growth, revenue advancement, product launches, right? Everything around those kinds of things. So when I say customer and employee experience, I literally mean at that moment that matters. When an employee in some way touches a customer or a customer in some way touches a company. So that's kind of a little history and then kind of why, those two things are important.
Because in some ways, you'd think that making it easy for employees to do their job well would be part of the mindset of people. So I get the complementarity, I get how it can go wrong, but I'm trying to work out what would stop people just addressing it as they need their people to do their job right if they want to make that moment that matter really excel. So just tell me a bit more.
Absolutely. And that's really, listen, I am guilty of this as well. My very first book, which was in 2018 called Growth IQ, translated in 12 languages, became a Wall Street Journal bestseller, landed me on the Thinkers 50 list. Like it was a big success. In 60,000 words, I mentioned employee, maybe 150 of those words. Right. My very first chapter in the book was customer experience. Live and die in the hill of the customer. Customer's always right. Customer's your true north. Customer, customer, customer. And it was this over pivot to customer that over the last 25 years or so, especially as digital made its way into the nomenclature and the cloud became so pervasive, that experience became even more and more important. And it's not necessarily that people don't understand happy employee, happier customer, get those two things right? Richard Branson has said it. I mean, many people have said it. I am not the first. But the keepers of that promise you make as a company, your vision statement, your values, we will be the, best for you. We will develop the best products, or we will give you the best service, whatever your tagline is.
Yes.
The keepers of those promises are your employees, not your PowerPoint decks, not your vision and value statements on the wall, not your weekly dashboards as an executive. It is your employees. And we did 2.5 years of research, and unfortunately, we found that no one owns employee experience. Executives are so over-focused on customer that the result of that is that employees are sort of this forgotten group. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn in what we've done around customer experience and apply those to employee experience. And that was really where the foundation of the book started to take shape, because I had no aspirations of writing a second one. And then lo and behold, when the research came back, I was like, I really missed it in my first book.
And the first was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I mean, surely you had some inclination of doing it again. Come on. You've been honest about you're not a culture expert. So come on, be honest about that too.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I've been working at Salesforce now for 7.5 years, and I have a front row seat to the power that culture has on our ability to innovate, to grow, to be resilient, to be responsive, to be customer centric. All the things we're known for and do, the heartbeat of it is our culture. And I think that was a miss, because I wrote Growth IQ without 7.5 years sort of living in an environment. So it opened my eyes to a statement I made on stage. I didn't think it was a coincidence. Salesforce is a great place to work globally, in the top 5, regardless of sort of what, survey you read. 2, one of the most innovative companies in the world, according to other people, not us. And then 3, the fastest growing enterprise software company in the world. I didn't think that was a coincidence. And that's where it began. I was like, could I prove that? Right? A lot of people have said it, as I just said. But when we went looking for proof, correlation, causation, direct connection between those two things, it intuitively is obvious and logical. Yeah. But executing against that, very different story.
So let's drill into that. That sort of causality. So imagine you're in a conversation with the CEO of one of Salesforce's biggest customers, and they ask the question, they say, look, we're doing pretty well. Customer experience is pretty good, but our employees are grumbling. We know it's not easy for them. I've read your book. It's brilliant. And you've listened to this podcast out of all of the ones you've done, right? Only this one. What would you say to her or him about where to start?
Well, so I hear 3 things pretty consistently. Pre-book being written, when I was first sharing the research. 1, if it's so obvious, why isn't everyone doing it? And underneath that, I may hear, we're growing really quickly, so what we're doing is working. Sometimes, that great growth can hide some of the bad habits. Because if you were growing going into the pandemic, and then all of a sudden you're facing this great resignation.
Yes.
Were your employees happy? You could argue probably not. Now we're facing on the other side, at least, in the US, the sort of phenomenon known as quiet quitting, right? Where people are just collecting a paycheck, but they're not engaged and really committed. The second thing I'd hear is, who owns it? Who owns this employee experience conversation? Because Tiffani, you've just been very clear about this is not an HR thing, right? And what's interesting is I've gotten better at answering that question on who owns it, that I almost feel like that is an expert mind question. Meaning, I'm a leader who's been very successful. I know what I'm doing, what has worked for us will work for us in the future. And how I've run things has been, well, I need someone to own it, run it, silo it, measure it, manage it, track it, headcount, budget, like all those things. And early on in sharing the research, I was having a conversation with another Thinkers 50 member, Liz Wiseman, and I was sort of explaining this to her, and she goes, if it becomes an ownership conversation, you're going to get off track, right? Because it will become this silo discussion.
Yes.
I said, it isn't. It's really about this sort of experience mindset. And I went, stop. And I go, hold on. And I wrote it down and I go, that's the title of the book. Because if I can get people out of the who owns it question, which starts to get into that kind of look back, let me stand up a group, that, right? And I will often say, look, Salesforce, fastest growing, everything I just said, great culture, top place to work. We only stood up an employee experience team less than a year ago. And I talk about that as a case study in the book.
Yes, you do, yeah.
So even if you have a strong culture, doesn't mean you're focusing on the things and some of the items that I call out in the book. The third thing I'd hear is, what's the ROI? Right? Like if I spend $1 on customer, I spend X on customer, I know I get Y back. Net promoter, recency of purchase, basket size or share of wallet increases, whatever metric you choose to use. Those tended to be the three that I heard. And so back to your question, if I say that back to that leader who asked the question, they'll go, yes, like tell me more of that. Then I start probing and I ask this one question. Tell me the top metrics you track currently for customer experience. And is it tied to executive comp? And so they'll rattle off and they'll tell me yes or no, whether it's tied to executive comp. Now I'll ask, tell me the top 5 metrics for employee. And is it tied to executive comp? Sometimes they'll know the answer on the employee side. A lot of times they'll be like, I don't know, I have to ask my HR leader, who, by the way, doesn't necessarily sit at the C-suite table, might tuck under the COO or tuck under the CEO or tuck under somebody else in the organization. But I don't know if chief human resource officers are always sitting at the C-suite sort of executive leadership team, right? And once they start answering those questions, I can almost see the light bulb start firing on their own. Like they almost are starting to see the way through. What's the first thing they do is they might not know the answers to those questions, or it is in fact what I've just described. It's siloed. It's over here. It's not comprehensive. So, it's always the same one thing I would recommend, or because it all depends where they are on this journey.
Yeah. No, I get that. So imagine you convinced them it's not about ownership. You've convinced them of causality and the fact that it needs to be embedded in people's psyche, in their mindset. They'll, of course, then ask the question, which you just alluded to, which is, okay, so I get all that. Fantastic. I want that mindset. How do I nurture that experienced mindset? So what would you say to them?
It most definitely starts at the top, but I have a caveat on that statement, is that it also can start at the bottom if leaders are willing to listen. So to your point, right? You may have employees grumbling, like your net promoter score might be high, but your attrition score is high. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, so I'm happy customers, but my employees aren't happy.
Yes.
And so one of the things we found in the research was most organizations, if not all, are surveying employees at least once a year. During the pandemic, it might have been monthly, right? Or it could have even been more frequent than that. Now, maybe it's twice a year or quarterly. But unfortunately, 3/4 of companies and executives that are surveying employees do nothing with the data.
Yes.
Right? So your employees are telling you what's working, what's not working, and nobody is listening because nobody owns it. Yeah. HR may be looking at those surveys and looking at sentiment analysis and those kinds of things. But again, this entire concept for experience mindset is not everything related to HR, like comp or DE&I or equity or inclusivity or those kinds of things. Very important, not in this book. But it is things like, are the systems and tools that you use, do they allow you to do your job efficiently?
Yes.
One question, yes or no? And, if you start to ask about the mechanics of what someone has to do every day, it gives you a very different line of sight into where your issues are. For example, talking about customer experience and all the money we've spent, would you, those of you listening to this, would you ever ask your customers to go to one tab to find product information, go to another tab, an entirely different tab to place the order, an entirely different tab to enter your credit card information, entirely different tab to add their shipping information, an entirely different tab to track their order. Would you ask a customer to have 5 tabs on their desktop or phone or tablet open at one time?
They wouldn't be a customer for very long, would they?
Wouldn't be a customer for very long. And nor would you probably have your job. Yet we do that to employees every single day. We ask them to switch between multiple applications, to collaborate, to serve a customer, to work on a product, to work through issues, whatever it might be. It's okay for the employee, but not okay. We would never dream of doing that to the customer, right? So from a philosophical standpoint, this is an operating philosophy of, if you're going to do something for your customer, I want you to pause for just a second and ask, what is the intended or unintended consequence to my employee? Does it make their job harder or easier? If I do this for the customer, is there anything I need to do to prepare my employee for that? And if you're going to do something for the employee, ask the same question for customer. If I can get everybody who's listening to this and read the book to just take that pause and ask that question, my gut tells me, and the research sort of validates, that you will start to see a tighter connection between the decisions that are made that aren't happening in silos. And you very quickly realize that this is a team sport. It is HR. It is IT. It is the sales and marketing, customer service. It is all parts of the organization. And so that is why it is so important that it is a culture conversation. People, process, technology, and culture. Those are really the 4 areas that have to align to get this right.
It's very inspiring. I mean, the way you convey that is very inspiring. It's for employees, it sort of elevates their position in the organization to what it should be, which is critical to value and to the values of the organization. Whereas, and I've been in leadership teams and I've advised plenty of them where we have all the KPIs on employees, and they are talked about. They are in some executive comp. But if we're honest, the delta between them and sales and them and customer experience is big. They're sort of, as long as you've done nothing wrong, it's okay. That's a sort of level here. And then, for employees, and then it's really about your sales. And that's where it comes down. Whereas what you're doing is saying they should be the same level. They should be integrated. And I guess the fact that you talk about how employees can talk about and people have to listen to their problems, their frictions in their daily life, that's very empowering. If you're an employee, somebody actually asking, what can we change? What can we do to make your life? Do you not think it's a really empowering type of conversation?
I couldn't agree more. And that's why, look, this isn't just, it can't be just a top-down conversation. If you're listening to this and you're in middle management or you're a first-time manager and you have a small team, it's your next team meeting, ask one question. Is there a tool that you're using that you have to use to do your job every single day? Could be something like a Slack, could be something like a Salesforce, could be something like a whatever it is, that we could maybe fix some piece or part of it, a process, an integration, training, to allow you to maximize your productivity. Ask one question.
Yeah, that's a
then
great
if you're
way
going to ask that question, right, you have to listen. And then if you listen, then you have to come back to them and say, okay, I heard you. Here's what we're going to do to fix whatever that was, or here's why we're not going to fix it. Like, people don't mind if it doesn't happen, if they understand why not. But if they just go, it doesn't happen because no one listens to me, that's a very different message than, well, I told them, I shared it, they listened, they took the time to explain to me why not. If you're in a highly regulated industry, you can't do what might make your job easier because we have to do it this way, whatever. Employee goes, okay, didn't know that. Now I know that. Okay, so I'll move on. Can we do it in some way? Because if it's just like, it is the pebble in your shoe that you won't, just feel it all day, every day, maybe that's not the right role for you. But if you understand, then you can do something. So this is not about spend millions and reorganize the business and stand up a whole new division and blow up everything you've ever done. This is literally just start asking questions and listening to what your employees are looking for as it relates to people, process, tech, and
Yes.
culture, not
Yes.
everything else, which, as I said, is very important, but not as part of this work that I
Yeah,
did.
you sort of want to. You're trying to create a series of bubbling up conversations that surface these issues, which ultimately can not only leave people feeling happier, more fulfilled, doing good work, but ultimately has a great link to customer experience. But let's just flip for a moment. I know you said right
Okay.
at the beginning. You said, "Look, I'm not a culture expert." Very refreshingly humble and honest for guests on this show. I'm being cheeky, who are experts at everything. I'm
I
kidding.
am
I'm
not.
kidding. But I've worked with quite a few organizations that have great cultures in the broadest sense and very, high performing, inclusive, empowering, and not just buzzwords. Those are meaningful words. And they have great, experience, but they've lost sight to some degree, surprisingly, of customer, whether it's the customer needs, the jobs to be done. So they're all having a great time. Everyone's enjoying it, but actually they're not winning in the marketplace. I know that's a different channel, a different lens to look at this. How do you correct that? What do you do if you're in that situation?
Yeah, well, it's really both. Look, this is not, I don't want you hearing that, oh, it's employee, and we get into the who's employee first, customer second, customer first, employee second, customer centric, employee centric, people first, like wrong conversation.
I agree.
Because we're just not going to win the first second, right?
Yeah.
Because then that goes back to what I was saying, right? That kind of legacy mindset of it has to be this.
Yeah.
I do believe in prioritizing. I do believe in focus. And I do believe there's a crisis of prioritization if you're trying to chase both at the same time. But that is why you need both to be working in a more harmonious way for one to be more successful. So if you are really focused on your culture and the people, and you believe if we get that right, everything else will follow, and you're not paying attention to the needs and wants and changing expectations of your customers, you might be developing really amazing products that no one wants to buy, or you may be in markets that are no longer that interesting, or a competitor has entered that is just eating your lunch and you're not able to win because things are off. So this is about making sure that when you understand what's happening for customer, and you have to make a pivot that you bring along the organization, that you can't just solve everything. Wow, we have really happy employees and they love working here, but we're not growing. That doesn't work either.
Yeah.
It's all of it has to be sort of collective and more thought of and more intentional, if you will, and being more thoughtful around the decisions that you make. So, look, I am in awe of organizations that are people first. And I think that people are customers and employees and partners and vendors and the community and the team that cleans your office. And people don't only work for you. And for those in the gig economy, like, a delivery driver, they don't work for you at all. They're Airbnb are hosts, employees of Airbnb? No, but they are part of the success of the organization. If the hosts do a bad job, customers don't want to stay there or, give bad reviews. And that has a ripple effect through the remainder of their business. So people first, I think, might be a way to get out of that, because people can be all inclusive of all the people that are part of the broader stakeholders in the success of your organization. But that is kind of for a lot of, companies or executives who like that. We're customer centric, we're customer first, or we're about our people, and they can't be bimodal where they're kind of fast and slow across two topics of internal customer, external customer, and how do we make that more integrated in its effort.
If you are one of these people in the C-suite who's grown up with that, CXO first mindset, and you get the fact that it needs to change, you've touched on a number of things, but what is the hardest part? What's the hardest obstacle you have to overcome in order to create that leap to effectively a higher performing, higher growth positioning of the organization by fusing that complementarity between the two? Your conversations, your research, what's the one or two nuggets you think, they've really got to overcome this?
So I would say it was the opening quote stat, if you will, from Growth IQ in 2018. And it was a study from Bain that, it was a slice of companies above 5 billion and below 5 billion, but let's just make it even here. It was like, a little more than 90% of businesses of under 5 billion, above 5 billion. I mean, it's such a massive number under and a smaller number over. So that's why I said, let's just blend it. But it was internal inertia was the number one reason companies were not able to sustain long-term growth. And so that usually makes executives uncomfortable. But wait a second, it's something I'm doing internally. And by the way, right at the end of that sentence that I wrote in Growth IQ, I said, unless it's a black swan event, boom, right? And then we find ourselves in a pandemic, which many argue wasn't a black swan, but for another day. You can say that this internal inertia of we're successful, why change? It's always the way we've done it, or this is where I'm comfortable. That tends to be one. But the other was that third thing I said that I heard often was, what's the ROI? Like, I think what gets executives excited is effort with return versus just, this sounds good, Tiffani. And I read the book and I heard your conversation with David and I get it. I'm in. But if I don't see a return, I can't do it. I have to make decisions about where I'm going to spend my money. And so through the research, we found sort of a couple of numbers I'll share here. One was companies that this was US based. We did this study with Forbes Insight. US-based, publicly traded, brands that got customer and employee experience right, according to the numbers we looked at, had a 1.8 times faster growth rate than those that did not. So for a $1 billion brand, it was a $40 million impact. Now, if you got one right and one not so great, you still were in the sort of 4% CAGR range. And at the right was in a medium 8% CAGR range. So it's not like you're not growing. Again, going to what you were just saying, you can still grow if you're nailing customer or nailing employee, and you're just getting the sort of draft from the other, right? And you're not focused on both. But when focused on both, you get this multiplier. Really in a second study we did with Columbia and Stanford, this was a very isolated retailer in the US, 1,000 stores, looking at attributes of the employee and customer and what they were able to fix. And we were able to show and prove causation of a 50% improvement in revenue per hour, per head, per store employee, by fixing those things in the employee side, right? It's transactional, it's part-time, full-time, tools, systems, training, coworkers, management, what store hours, location, like there was all these things they looked at. So that all of a sudden gets executives to go, wait, I'm sorry, what? Right? I can get a 1.8 a faster growth rate. And in this particular use case, you can show causation. What if you got a 10% lift, 5% lift? You might not get 50, but like at least directionally, you see the improvement. Now, all of a sudden, they're like, okay, I want a little piece of that, because I'm not saying invest billions, as I said, right? Hire new, do all this, change a bunch. It's what you already have. How do you get better doing that? Yeah. And will you be able to get lift from it?
And the changes, I mean, if you identify them, listen to the people, obviously they're quite specific. Then, as I say, they're not necessarily whole scale. But the question I have, I guess, is that, and you've alluded to this in this conversation, Tiffani, and in the book, that you focus on employee experience, which is an aspect of the overall culture. But we all know that culture change takes years, if not decades, to affect, particularly in traditional organizations, obviously less so when you're in an earlier startup or scale-up situation. But I'm curious, from your experience and research, how do you scale what you described in terms of experience? Because it's not, if you've got multiple countries, business units, divisions, they'll all have different experiences, needs, frictions, issues. So just talk to me about how you go from, if you like, pilots or looking at specific areas to scaling it up so it becomes an enterprise-wide mindset.
Well, I think start with what I said a few minutes ago, which is list out what are the top customer experience metrics you track and are they aligned to comp. Do the same thing for employee. But I want matching. So if you're doing NPS, I want eNPS. For employee net promoter score. If you're doing customer effort score, I want an employee effort score. If you're doing customer satisfaction, I want employee satisfaction. Like, start there, because then you'll start to uncover, hold on a second, like our customer experience is high on satisfaction, but our employee satisfaction is low. If we could lift that employee satisfaction, would we get a lift here? And we know when we get a lift in customer, we see revenue go up. So if we can get employee satisfaction to go up, which then gets customer satisfaction to go up even further, we're going to get greater growth. Okay, so now what parts of the employee day to day has the greatest impact on satisfaction? And to your question, it might be different by location, division, manager. Because you could argue, a very large company out of the US starts with an A, out of Seattle. Their tagline was, we want to be the most customer-centric company on the planet. Customer-obsessed company on the planet. How happy are their employees? Not so happy.
Yeah.
Now, you could say, well, hold on. Maybe the headquarters employees are happy, but the warehouse employees aren't happy. Or you could say, well, maybe the headquarters and the warehouse employees are happy, but the drivers, delivery guys aren't happy or girls aren't happy, right? So you can't just peanut butter that our satisfaction score is X, but you don't know if you have pockets of problems. And so start looking through the data and information you have already. That's the first thing I'd say. And then do it by, as I said, right? Division, region, manager level, et cetera. So you can start to look for those hot spots, greens and reds and yellows in your organization. The second thing I'd say is stand up an employee advisory board. Similar to what you do for customer, do it for employee. And I don't want leaders on it. I want individual contributors cross-functionally, where when something is going to change in the organization, cultural, technical, process-wise, right, or people-wise, that it runs through this employee advisory board. And I don't mean that they have the final say, but they will catch things that the executive suite has no idea is going on.
Yes.
For example, 52% of executives in our study globally believe that the technology they have deployed in the organization is working effectively and efficiently, which means 48% believe it isn't for another day, 52%. 32% of employees agree with that statement. There's already a 20-point delta between what the C-suite thinks about the technology they've deployed and what the general employees think about the technology that's deployed. But wait for it. Only 20% of customer-facing employees agree with that statement.
There you go.
Only 20%.
That's very compelling.
And so 80% of your customer-facing employees, so that's sales, service delivery, marketing, customer service, call center, right? Customer facing, only 20% agree that they have the right tools to collaborate effectively, that they're productive and highly efficient doing their job using tech. So it's not lost on me. Obviously, I work where I work, right? But that is massive.
I agree. I could just imagine in a conversation in the C-suite of one of your customers or clients, and they may be expecting, not necessarily from you, but from others, a long PowerPoint presentation, and you literally just in 1 minute articulate the delta or the deltas. It's like, that's it. Just get on with it. But let's now flip again. Let's turn to you. I'm curious always with authors, speakers, advisors, how they actually practice what they preach. So as you've been developing the research, writing the book, and obviously now speaking about it, what's the biggest change in your own mindset that you've made?
Oh, I could never go back to being compartmentalized on talking about growth in isolation or customer experience in isolation or improving marketing engagement in isolation or technology in isolation or process in isolation. Like before I did the research, I used to say all the time, I didn't think we had a technology problem in the market. I believed we had a people process problem. And I said that for one reason. I was very early in the World Wide Web. I use that term on purpose. The first domain name I ever sold, because I've sold technology for almost 30 years, was in 1996. Okay. I bought my first domain name in 1997. I was Eloqua's beta client in 2001. I was Constant Contact's beta client in 2002. So I've been on this journey for a minute. And back then, there was maybe a dozen or so marketing technology products. There is 10,000 that are tracked now by the analyst community. That's tracked, which means there's way more than that. So that tells me we don't have a technology problem. So why, with all this technology, has productivity dipped in some cases, right? Employee satisfaction has dipped, because it's just this spider web has gotten very complicated. And so now I can say that with some wood behind the arrow of the statement. I can say, look, I can walk you through what employees are saying versus what the C-suite is saying
Yes.
around process, people, tech. Culture is kind of that no one listens to me. I don't feel safe. I don't feel they invest in my career. They don't want me to further, things that are going on. So, that conversation, but right in people process tech, which is nothing new, right? It's the Levitt diamond that's been around since the 60s, PPT. I added C, right? I added culture because I believed culture and people needed some delineation because people is different than the overarching culture of a company.
Yes.
So I would say that's what I've learned through this is that I did a disservice. But now that I know better and I've got some ability to back up what I'm saying, I can have a much broader and impactful conversation. I was a lot more narrow before, but again, not getting into everything around people and culture because it's just not my lane. Yeah.
That's great that you reflected in that way and obviously developed a great book to address that issue. Let's take a bigger picture question then in terms of if you look at your overall impact. What impact are you looking to have on the world around you as you do your work?
When I was leaving Gartner, again, I was there a decade. I started out as a research director and I made it all the way up to fellow over the course of 10 years. I was the only analyst at Gartner worldwide covering sales transformation, go-to-market models, indirect strategies. So I had a front row seat in working with and helping design strategies for probably the largest 50 tech companies in the world. And I felt like I had an impact, right? In some way, in the background, I felt I played a part in the earnings calls of some of them, right? Or a product would be a hit and I'd feel I played a small part in it. And it was a way for me to feel like I was still in the mix, but I wasn't in the public mix, right? I was working sort of in the background, which allowed me to have access to things I never dreamed I would ever see or participate in. But when I was getting ready to leave, right, and move, and I didn't know where I was going, I had attended the Salesforce user conference, which is called Dreamforce, for 9 years. 9 events during my time as a Gartner analyst. And whenever I would leave Dreamforce, I always felt like I wanted to be a better person. Like I would leave the keynotes and go, I love what technology has been able to do for the world. It wasn't about the speeds and feeds and product announcements. It was about how are nonprofits, changing the world, what we're doing for climate, what we're doing for these things. And I was so inspired that it was an easy change for me when I had to make a decision of where I wanted to go. I'm like, I want to go there because I align to the values and the culture. And I want to explore how I can start to really give back in a way that is rewarded, right, and acknowledged, and by the way, also promoted, right? They want us to do it. It's not necessarily expected, but it is one. We have a mantra. It's called 111. It's really part of who we are. 1% of our time as an organization, 1% of our equity, and 1% of our software we donate. And so over the last 24 years, 1% of our time is donated some 8 million hours of volunteer time globally. So, it is something that I could then kind of hang my hat on, right? So now I've done things twice. I've spoken at the UN. I've got to speak at the World Economic Forum. I participate in activities around groups and not-for-profits that I never had access or exposure to before. So I feel like it gives me this view of the other side of how technology can really make hopefully the world a better place. And I work for a company that has the ethical and humane use of technology group in our company to make sure we always try to stay on the right side of that and build trust. And I think that those things align to where I was in my career. So I feel like that's how I'm able to facilitate giving back at scale.
That's fantastic. That's very inspiring. And in a nutshell, what are you working on yourself in terms of your own development right now?
I am so knee deep in the sort of book launch. She is still a crawling toddler, right? I mean, she's very early. And so I'd say this, what I said 8 weeks ago in the first sort of 10 weeks ago, the first set of podcasts I was doing and what I'm saying today has evolved as the questions got asked, as I had more and more conversations, as I've read reviews of what people have said about the book, what they've said back that stood out to them. I am constantly asking and listening
Great.
so that I can course correct. I don't just say something and go, this is the way I'm going to say it, and I'm always going to say it. The first time I said, I kind of missed employee experience and growth IQ. And in many ways, this is my 11th path to growth, because growth IQ had 10. It really landed well, where people were like, well, I wasn't expecting you to say that, right? That you got it nailed. And this was just always in the plan. You were going to write a second book. That's not what happened, right? Or that culture
refreshing.
And people are it's just not my lane. Lots of people who do a much better job at it than I do. And there are lots of books out there about it. I'm really good at what I do. And, those around me and clients have said, these are your superpowers. And that's where I spend my time to double down. So I'm always looking to improve on that side of what I do, and explore new ways to get it out there and share it and tell that story in a way that resonates and gets people to want to do something different.
That's fantastic. That learning mindset comes through in what you say and all the work that I've seen, listened to and read. And last question then, when you're having your absolutely best day, like today, of course, your best day, you're smashing, you're just being really productive, effective, impactful, everything. What are the habits or practices that help you?
I am super organized, and I'm very linear in my thinking, and I am a listen visual learner. I'm tactile, right? I want to see, I want to have a conversation. I want a story. I don't want to just read it and go, did I absorb that? A story would be so much better being told, even by the person who wrote it. Even better. So I really enjoy my own podcast, because I love these conversations. I always learn something. I ask questions I'd be interested in knowing the answer to. I wrote a book I would want to read, helpful.
Yes.
And so I'd say for me, I try to have kind of short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, but I don't get caught up in any one of those three categories. I try to flow through them on whatever kind of comes my way through the day. But that has a lot to do with the, how grateful and wonderful and blessed I am to work for the company I work for that allows me to do this as my quote unquote job.
Yes,
I'm an individual contributor. No one reports to me. I'm not on the sales side of the organization. Like, my role is to go out and help customers understand the value of technology, where and how they can be more effective and efficient with it. And then along the way, right, trying to make businesses more productive for both their employees and the customers and the greater shareholder community. And so, that gives me a sense of freedom and opportunity that not everybody gets the opportunity to do, and I'm well aware. But that's probably how I organize myself. Like, I sort of go where the day brings me, outside of the things obviously I'm committed to. But sometimes I'll get stuck on a topic and I go way deep in it, and I want to learn about it, and then I want to know who's the expert on it, and I want to have them on my podcast and get a show and have a conversation. And it's just wonderful learning every single day.
That's brilliant. Your vitality, your learning, your curiosity is fantastic, and that's shone through this podcast. I'm grateful for your time. The book is something I recommend not just to read but use, and that's what we focused on today, which is how do you actually elevate the platform of an organization, the growth prospects, in terms of financial, brand, and very, very importantly, the people experience within that. So, Tiffani, I'm very grateful for you coming onto the show. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Fantastic. So that was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Do check out the other great episodes in the series. Sign up to the podcast, the YouTube channel. And if you're feeling exceptionally generous, please do give me a wonderful rating. Tiffani, thank you ever so much again.